The night in Savannah felt heavier than usual, as if the very air was aware that something momentous was about to be born. The streets around the set were silent, but inside Tom Hanks, the war was deafening. He already had 2 Oscars on his shelf. Philadelphia had given him dramatic acclaim, and before that, Big had proven he could carry a film with the delicacy of a child in an adult's body. He was respected, acclaimed, pointed to as one of the greatest of his generation. But now, facing Forrest Gump, he felt small. Because for Hanks it wasn't enough to applaud himself or repeat formulas. He knew he was facing a role that would define not just a career, but a piece of culture itself. The weight wasn't in the lines, but in the fear of failing before a story that demanded more than technique. It demanded truth. The script trembled in his hands, as if carrying 1,000 invisible judgments. Forrest was not just a character. He was a thin line between the sublime and the ridiculous. Tom knew that if he got the tone wrong, the entire film would collapse into caricature. He walked around the empty set, testing awkward steps, phrases spoken in a drawn-out accent. But with each attempt it sounded false, forced. It was Tom Hanks imitating Forrest, not Forrest living in Tom Hanks. He took a deep breath, looked at the crumpled script, and felt that for the first time in a long time, he didn't have all the answers. And then, the silence was torn by a sound that shouldn't have been there, the metallic creak of an old projector. Tom turned with a start. The dust in the air danced under the beam of light projected onto the wall. The film was running with no one around, as if moved by invisible hands. And from the black and white film emerged an impossible presence. First shadows, then outlines, until before him, whole, with his bowler hat tilted, his mustache neatly trimmed, and his cane resting with that unmistakable elegance, stood Charles Chaplin. Tom's heart pounded, his eyes wide with disbelief. He blinked, took a step back, squinted as if testing reality. But the man was there. Not an illusion, not a dream. Chaplin in flesh and spirit, or something beyond. The master of silent cinema, the eternal tramp. The soul who had made the world laugh and cry at the same time. "Lost, Mr. Hanks?" The voice sounded calm, soft, British, but with a paternal sweetness that transcended any barrier of time. Tom tried to answer, but his throat closed. When he finally managed, his voice came out choked, as if confessing a secret to himself. I don't know how to play Forrest without it looking like a joke." Chaplin smiled sideways, twirling his cane as if sketching the simplicity of life in the air. "The most powerful comedy is born from pain, and the deepest pain can be healed by a smile. You must not interpret Forrest as a fool, but as the purity the world has forgotten. There are no more innocents in this world, Mr. Hanks, and that is why Forrest is necessary." Tom put his hands to his head as if trying to contain the whirlwind within him. "But if I exaggerate, everyone will laugh at me, and if I am too restrained, they will feel nothing. I don't know where the balance is." Chaplin walked towards him with the same sway that decades earlier had hypnotized silent audiences. His steps were not just a walk, they were poetry in motion. "When I created The Tramp," he said, "they laughed at my walk, my mustache, my clothes. But do you know why they stayed? Because behind the stumble there was humanity, because every fall carried pain, every look hid hope. Forrest should not be a character to be imitated. Forrest is an open window to innocence. He is what we all once were but forgot." Tom's eyes welled up. He lowered his head, defeated. "What if I'm not capable?" Chaplin raised the tip of his cane, gently lifting his chin. His eyes, at once weary and full of fire, met Hanks. "All great artists doubt. I doubted before every film, every scene. Fear is part of creation. But remember, it's not about you. It's not about Hanks. It's about the people. Forrest will be the mirror of your goodness. He will show that love crosses generations, that innocence can be more powerful than malice. You have already proven yourself a great actor, Tom, but now you need to leave the actor behind. You need to put on the skin of purity and nothing else." Silence fell between them, but it was not empty. It was full of meaning. For the first time that night, Tom took a deep breath and, though tears streamed down, he felt something inside him align. The following hours became almost liturgical, a deep dive between 2 worlds separated by time, but united by art. Chaplin spoke like someone traversing layers of eternity, and each phrase seemed etched in the air as if it were a testament. He reminded the young Hanks that he had not always been a genius in the world's eyes. "I was booed before I was applauded," he recounted, his voice choked with old memories. "They called me sappy, a fool. They laughed at my sensitivity, as if feeling were weakness. But the audience understood, because deep down we all suffer. We all have fear. I just had the courage to put that on screen." Tom listened in silence, like a student before the definitive teacher, and each story seemed to be etched into his skin. Chaplin walked through the empty studio, and each step sounded like the rhythmic beat of a heart that hadn't stopped, even after death. He told of his miserable childhood in London, the nights without food, his mother institutionalized in psychiatric hospitals, the loneliness that almost crushed him. "I laughed so I wouldn't cry," he said with a melancholic glint in his eye. "And when the world laughed with me, I realized it was also crying and healing." Comedy, Tom, is just the disguise of pain. And when you allow that pain to show, even if disguised as innocence, then you will have found the truth. Tom Hanks felt the weight of those words pierce his chest. He knew that, despite having already won Oscars, respect, and fame, he was still searching for something greater, that spark that would free him from technique and place him in the territory of immortality. Chaplin saw him falter and added, "When you're in front of the cameras, don't think about Forrest. Think about Jenny. Think about Forrest's mother. Think about the people you've loved and lost. Bring that love, that pain into your eyes. The audience won't see an actor. They'll see themselves reflected. And the truth, my boy, is irresistible." "So Forrest isn't a mask," Tom murmured, tears silently streaming down. "It's a revelation." Chaplin smiled like someone who had been waiting for exactly that conclusion. "Exactly, my boy. You won't hide in Forrest. You will reveal yourself in him. And if you have the courage to strip yourself of Hanks, of titles, of awards, of applause, and show only the soul, then you will move generations. And not only that, you will remind the world that innocence still exists." The projector creaked one last time, as if coughing out the final sparks of life. Chaplin's image wavered, flickering like an old film on the verge of breaking. Still, his elegance remained intact. With a gentle gesture, he adjusted his bowler hat, leaned on his cane, and looked at Tom with a gaze that seemed to pierce not only the room, but time and mortality itself. His voice, almost a whisper, sounded more powerful than thunder. "Don't forget, Tom. In the end, what truly matters is not being remembered as an actor, but as someone who made people feel. Make them feel, and you will have made history." The words echoed like an eternal oath, and then, like the last frame of a film burned by the projector's light, Chaplin disappeared. Silence returned to the studio, but it was no longer the same. Tom remained motionless, breathing deeply, trying to process what he had just experienced. His heart pounded like a slow-motion drum. He knew nothing would be the same from then on. He closed his eyes, and upon opening them, found an unprecedented clarity. Forrest was not a character to be imitated or parodied. Forrest was purity in human form, and it was up to him, Tom Hanks, to lend his soul to this innocence forgotten by the world. For the first time, he felt no fear. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be honest. The next morning, when the cameras started rolling, Tom entered the scene transformed. His eyes carried tears, but they were not from insecurity. They were the result of the previous night's revelation. Every gesture seemed disarmed of artifice. Every word escaped simple and true, as if born from the heart, not the script. The crew, accustomed to tense rehearsals and endless repetitions, fell silent. The air on the set grew heavy with emotion, as if everyone understood at once. Forrest Gump had been born there before them, not as a caricature, but as human purity. The following weeks became an almost sacred ritual. Tom no longer sought the director's approval for every scene, nor did he look to his colleagues for confirmation that he was on the right track. He simply let Forrest exist through him, effortlessly, fearlessly, as if the character had always been there waiting to be revealed. Each take seemed enveloped in a magical aura. Often just one take was enough, because what the camera captured was not acting. It was the naked truth of a man who surrendered entirely to the ingenuity, fragility, and silent greatness of Forrest. The technical crew, seasoned by productions where exhaustive repetition was the norm, was surprised by every scene. Something inexplicable was happening. When Tom walked through the set, assistants instinctively lowered their voices, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Everyone felt the rare atmosphere he carried. Forrest was no longer just a role written on pages. He was a living presence, and everyone there knew they were witnessing history in motion. The filming of Forrest Gump progressed as if each take were a piece of eternity. The crew, experienced in major productions, perceived that something different was happening in front of the cameras. It wasn't just a film. It was as if each scene carried an aura of timelessness, as if Forrest already existed before Tom Hanks and was just waiting for the right moment to be revealed. As the schedule neared its end, the backstage transformed into a space of reverence. Voices lowered when Tom crossed the set, cameras prepared in absolute silence, and even director Robert Zemeckis seemed to speak less, as if he knew there was nothing to correct, only to witness. On the last day of shooting, the final scene ended in absolute silence. No immediate applause, no euphoric cut. It was as if everyone feared breaking the spell. Only after a few seconds did the studio erupt in applause, tears, and hugs. Some technicians cried. The makeup team hugged as if they had just seen history being written. Tom, motionless, looked around with his heart pounding, as if expecting at any moment to see Chaplin materialize once more in the middle of the set. He didn't see him, but he felt him. In the silence, in the breath of each colleague, in the invisible weight of the moment. He lowered his head and whispered to himself, "Thank you, Charlie. I just needed to feel." Months later, when the film was completed, the first test screenings revealed something unusual even for Hollywood. Entire audiences laughed and cried, but at the end there was none of the typical chatter upon leaving. People remained seated, in reverent silence, trying to process what they had just experienced. Critics, many of them known for destroying careers with harsh words, wrote that Forrest Gump was not just cinema. It was a rare emotional experience, a mirror of the human condition. The New York Times highlighted the power of simplicity, while Variety called the film an intimate epic capable of transcending generations. Tom read each review with humility, remembering the nights in Savannah when he doubted himself, and smiled with the certainty that the secret was not in impeccable technique, but in the naked humanity Chaplin had taught him to embrace. At the official release, the impact was overwhelming. Packed cinemas worldwide transformed into cathedrals of emotion. People left screenings in tears, repeating phrases that quickly became eternal. "Life is like a box of chocolates. I'm not a smart man, but I know what love is." The audience didn't just watch the film, they lived it. The box office soared, surpassing $678 million worldwide. But more than the numbers, it was the cultural impact that impressed. Forrest Gump appeared in newspapers, TV shows, graduation speeches, and even family conversations. The character's ingenuity had transformed into collective wisdom, and his simplicity echoed as a universal truth. And then came Oscar night, 1995. The red carpet reflected incessant flashes, but Tom walked serenely, different from the man who, months earlier, trembled with insecurity before a crumpled script. In that moment he was mature, transformed by the experience of having faced his own vulnerability. Forrest Gump was nominated for 13 categories and won 6, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actor. When they opened the envelope and announced his name, the audience rose in unanimous applause. Tom walked onto the stage, held the golden statuette, and took a deep breath. Before thanking his family, crew, and the audience, he paused. A moment that seemed to suspend time, looked discreetly upwards and said, "Thank you for reminding me that the most powerful truth is the simplicity of emotion." Everyone heard it as a poetic phrase, but Tom knew he was speaking to someone else, to that ghost who, one night, had stepped out of the film to offer advice. Charles Chaplin wasn't there, but his lesson had transcended time and become history. At that moment, amidst deafening applause and lights that resembled slow-motion lightning, Tom Hanks understood something that went far beyond the weight of a golden statuette. The Oscar in his hands was not just an award, nor even an industry recognition. It was the confirmation of a timeless truth that Charles Chaplin had whispered from the other side of the impossible. The most powerful comedy is born from pain. Innocence is the purest form of humanity, and when an actor has the courage to strip away masks, techniques, all the apparatus that protects him, to simply feel he is not acting, he is immortalizing himself. Forrest Gump was not just cinema, it was a living legacy, an invisible thread that united two artists separated by generations, but guided by the same mission, to move the world with the simplest and therefore most devastating truth. And now I ask you, who have reached this point of the journey with us, when was the first time you watched Forrest Gump? Do you remember how you felt when you heard the phrase that echoed in popular culture, "Life is like a box of chocolates"? Did you laugh at its ingenuity, cry at its purity, or remain silent, trying to absorb the immensity hidden in that simplicity? Have you ever considered that behind that scene, which today seems untouchable and inevitable, there was an actor who at that time was consumed by doubts, insecurities, and fears, exactly like all of us at some point in life? How many times have you believed you weren't capable of facing a challenge? How many doors have you left unopened for fear of not being up to the task? And what if I told you that even Tom Hanks, already acclaimed as one of the greatest actors of his generation, after successes like Big and Philadelphia, trembled at the possibility of failing, of being ridiculed, of not having the depth the role demanded? That changes everything, doesn't it? Because it reveals an uncomfortable yet liberating truth. Greatness is born precisely from the moment we face our ghosts. So I ask you, who is the Chaplin in your life? Who are the invisible voices, the people, memories, or inspirations that gave you the courage to go on when fear wanted to paralyze you? If this story touched your heart, if it made you look at Forrest Gump differently or even reminded you of silent battles you yourself have faced, I have a sincere and direct request. Subscribe to the channel now. Here every video is not just a narrative, but an encounter between past and present, between legends and humanity, between art and life. Your subscription is what keeps this project breathing. It's the fuel that allows us to continue bringing stories that inspire, move, and make you reflect. Don't let this flame die out. Click the button, share this video with someone who needs courage today, and help us show the world that, in the end, what truly matters is not being perfect, but being true. Because art is eternal, and when we walk together, so can we.